When you first get into OmniFocus, one of the first things you're going to want to do is start to develop some form of an organization around your projects. You can start to figure out what your contexts are going to be. And we've got another video to step you through how to do that. But you're going to want to figure out how to keep track of the projects. The core of the getting things done methodology and the core of OmniFocus floats around these projects and how you collect tasks into organized lists and how do you keep track of those. For me, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do this. I know there are a lot of folks that have alternative ways of looking at project groupings. I know Kurosh Dini has a way of using channels of work to keep track of his projects. That doesn't work for me. I have found that if I use the core GTD framework and the way that David Allen set it up, that if I use folders as they apply to Horizon 2, so areas of responsibility, it gives me a little bit of flexibility in how I can review and how I can keep track of the projects that I have going on. So for me, it's that simple. I have simple folders that allow me to keep track of these specific horizons of focus. So I'm going to fill these in quick here for you. So there we go. I have all of my areas of responsibility filled in. And for me, I have these in a very specific order. And there's another video on why I do that. But for me, I know that if I lay out all of the areas of responsibility that I have in order of importance from top to bottom, it gives me some flexibility in other areas of OmniFocus that I can take advantage of that order and just allow OmniFocus to help me auto prioritize, if you will, a lot of the tasks and projects that I have going on. So for me, the organization starts out with, this is my list of areas of responsibility. And if I were to look at these, and I can, this is the nice thing about a lot of OmniFocus is I can drag and drop these. So I know that I'm going to design for Google, that's a work project. For me, writing an article is also a work project. And then I've got a house and car single actions list, so that would go here as well. And of course, you can close all of these off so that they're not showing the projects. Because I don't have anything underneath of them, there's nothing to show. So that's where a lot of my organization starts. Now, it does get a little more interesting because there are always things that you will add to the overall system in order to take advantage of a lot of the power of OmniFocus. And I would call those kind of meta projects, meta tasks, if you will, because they're helping you keep the system itself in alignment. And let me fill in the extra folders here, and then we'll talk through each one of them. So the first one of those is guidance. And I put that at the top. So if you can see, I just inserted it there in the top. I put that at the top because guidance is a folder for me that keeps track of they're important projects to me. And those are primarily, if you use the Getting Things Done framework, those are the different horizons. So I referred to the areas of responsibility, the Horizon 2, that's what the exact folder names are. And then I also spell out my Horizon 3, 4, and 5 concepts and what those are. I spell those out in specific projects. So for me, if I go into this guidance and I fill in with the projects for those, now you can see this is exactly what my current system looks like. Underneath that guidance folder, I have Horizon 3, Horizon 4, and Horizon 5. And inside of those projects, I see a lot of people try to get really fancy with how they keep track of whether or not projects apply to a specific horizon, and they want it to somehow automatically track how they're doing as compared to each level of guidance. And for me, I tried that a number of times, and then at one point I just got fed up and I just created these projects, spelled out the details of it, just put in a single task for Horizon 5 and spelled out my mission. I went into Horizon 4 and I just created 3 or 4, 5 to 6 year goals that I want to shoot for. And then in Horizon 3, I just spelled out month by month for the next 6 months the specific things I wanted to work towards. And whenever I did that, I didn't have to worry about all of the auto checking and auto calculation for each specific horizon. I could just look over them And the nice thing about OmniFocus is you can set up those projects to review them once a month. You can do them weekly in your weekly review. You can come at them in a lot of different ways. And it's easy to just, let's look at it. This is what I have going on. And I put it at the top specifically so that whenever I'm doing a review, those projects show up at the very top of the list. So that means they are the first thing that I go over before I review the rest of my projects. It's a great way to get those missions and those goals in mind before you make decisions about the rest of your projects. So that's as simple as it is for me. So I'll fill in here with some of those tasks. So this is what that looks like. If I were to select those 3, you'll see this is a very close representation of what I truly operate with in my real system. I would show you my real system, but it's a little bit personal and it's got a lot of client-specific information I can't share, but this is very close to what I operate with, and some of this is actually copy-pasted from that. So it's that simple. You don't need to complicate those horizons and complicate that whole process, but we'll talk about that in detail later on in another video. So if I close off this guidance folder, some of the ones that I manage down at the bottom of that list, so the guidance comes in first, each of those areas of responsibility follow that, and then below that list, this is what I have. So I've got 6 subsets of projects that follow underneath of those areas of responsibility. The first of that is singles, and underneath the singles folder, I typically operate with a project for each area of responsibility, but they're single actions lists. So this is what that looks like. And the reason I spell those out separately is because, to me, those single actions lists, they are collections of tasks that are one-offs. They're not as important as my actual full-on projects. So I want those, and I want my single actions separated by area of responsibility, the Horizon 2, because there's enough of them that I need to just keep them separate. It's helpful to me to go look at the one-off tasks I have for work or that help me personally. It's just helpful to me to keep track of them in that way. So I separate them all off. I put them in a single folder called Singles, and I name them with -SA at the end because whenever I do some of the quick typing to fill in the project for a task, I can always just type in SA at the end of whatever it is that I'm typing in order to get the single actions list, as opposed to the folder name itself for that area of responsibility. So it's a quick little help because I only have to create them once. It's easier, and it makes it easier for me in the long run to add those projects to the task that I'm entering into OmniFocus. Now, underneath of singles, there's one here called Ancillary. And this is kind of my fun folder. I sometimes have projects that I just want to kind of dink around with. They're just kind of fun. They're extra, they're ancillary, and they help me in the long run. Now, I could probably put those into other categories within my areas of responsibility, but I just like having them separated off because I don't work on them very often, but when I do, they're fun. And if I get extra time, I'll go work on those. So sometimes my scripts will start from an ancillary project. Some of my OmniFocus scripts came from a project that started off there. So those are whenever I always make sure I try to set aside time to just play once in a while in a week. And that's where I go whenever I've got that time to play. Now, stalled projects, it's disheartening to say that I have enough projects that whenever I do my weekly review that I end up placing projects there. And it's quite simple. If I take a look at my work folder, say this design website for Google project, it's not going to move forward. We're going to put it on hold. My client comes in, say Google calls me and says, we're going to hold off on redesigning that website. Well, I'll come in here and I'll change the status to on hold. And once I've done that, I'll drag that down to stalled projects, and that's where it'll live. It'll stay there until I get a call or I reevaluate it and I want to bring it back to life. And it's just where I put things as kind of a holding place. Instead of putting those projects into the someday maybe folder, I would prefer to just keep those, they're pre-thought out projects, and I like to keep those separated and just call them stalled, call them what they are, put them on hold, and I'll review them, maybe monthly, maybe weekly, just kind of depends on the project as to how often I want to review potentially bringing it back to life. I am a someday maybe junkie. I leverage those quite heavily, and thank you to the Omni group. They have the URL scheme on iOS, which I have another video for that. And those spell out the URL scheme allows us to enter tasks directly into a specific project with a given context and all of the miscellaneous metadata that can go with it. And anytime I have a list of potential upgrades to, say, working with OmniFocus, I always create a separate list for those. They're always single actions lists, and they will continually accrue. I use a number of methods to automatically add to those lists, and I review them once a week and leverage them heavily. But anyway, I keep a separate folder for them just to keep them segmented off. And I do the same thing with checklists and templates. Now, I use those both in a number of ways. A lot of these little extra pieces here that are separate videos I've got for them because we can go into more detail there. But the important part is that I do keep those here and I keep them separated off. And when you look at this full list of projects, it does look like a lot. That is my full-on real system right there. And that's how I operate. I know that I want the stuff that guides me at the top. I want to go through my areas of responsibility because there's a way that I can just review those and make sure that I'm working on each one of them. And then I get down to the bottom, which is somewhat like the meta collection type projects that I was talking about at the beginning. But overall, this is how I would recommend you set it up. Don't always assume, you don't necessarily need to keep stalled projects separate. You may want to keep those within Someday Maybe. Sometimes people like to lump in checklists and templates together because they just know the difference. They only have 2 or 3 combined between those two categories, so it works out for them to keep them together. But for me, I have enough going on in each of those categories that I like to keep them separate and work with more folders than I do trying to lump them all together.